I never thought I would spend 34 years competing with my brother for my family's salvation. But the night my mother emptied her savings to bail Mason out, only to tell me 24 hours later to fund my own surgery, something inside me permanently died. What my parents fail to understand is that the daughter they abandoned is the silent linchpin keeping their company, contracts, and entire reputation from completely collapsing. My name is Leah Gonzalez. I am 34 years old, and I live alone in a small, suffocatingly hot apartment in Mesa, Arizona. Less than an hour ago, I walked out of a sterile, freezing clinic with a piece of paper that felt heavier than a death sentence. The doctor had looked me in the eye and told me the complex cyst on my right ovary was no longer something we could just monitor. It was growing. It was angry. And it required surgery before it ruptured and took my internal organs down with it. There was no delaying this. The word he used was urgent. I am standing in the middle of my kitchen now. The linoleum is cold against my bare feet. I am pressing the heel of my palm into my lower abdomen, trying to physically hold back a sharp, radiating pain that has been my shadow for months. It feels like a jagged piece of glass twisting inside me every time I take a breath. I stare at my phone on the dark granite counter. I have always been the good daughter, the reliable one, the one who fixes things, files things, pays things, the one who stays awake until 2 a.m. formatting insurance claims so my father can keep his business running. Today, I just need them to fix me. I dial my mother. I hold my breath. I let myself believe, just for one pathetic, fleeting second, that my survival might actually be treated like an emergency. The phone rings 2 times. My mother, Diana Gonzalez, answers. She does not say hello. She breathes in a ragged, panicked gasp. I can hear the absolute chaos unraveling in the background. Before I can even form the word mom, her voice cracks through the speaker. She is frantic. The background noise is deafening. I hear a chair scraping violently against a floor. I hear a glass shatter. And then I hear my father. Victor Gonzalez is shouting. His voice is a booming, terrifying rumble that I have spent my entire life trying to avoid. He is cursing about bank transfers and liquidating accounts. He is shouting about draining every single penny they have saved. I try to speak. I push the words through the pain in my gut. I tell her I am at home. I tell her I just left the doctor. She cuts me off. She says they are in a crisis. She says the world is falling apart. I listen to the shouting on the other end, and the pieces snap into place. It is Mason. It is always Mason. My older brother. The golden boy with the rotten core. Through the frantic back and forth of my parents' argument, the story bleeds through the receiver. Mason got arrested. Not a misunderstanding. Not a traffic ticket. He picked a fight with a security guard at a private, underground casino. He threw a punch. The police arrived, and when they ran his name, they found the outstanding warrants. An old gambling debt violation he swore he had taken care of years ago. Now he is sitting in a holding cell, and his bail is set at an astronomical number. My father is screaming at my mother to wire the money to a defense attorney, every cent of their savings, every account, every rainy day fund, every dollar they had tucked away. All of it is being shoveled into the furnace of Mason's mistakes. I clutch my stomach harder. The pain spikes, hot and sharp. I need a deposit. I say. My voice sounds thin, frail, like dry paper. I tell her I need to secure the surgery schedule. I tell her the doctor says it is dangerous to wait. I just need a fraction of what they are throwing at Mason to save my own body. My mother does not ask what is wrong. She does not ask where the pain is, or what the doctor said, or if I am scared. Her response is an automated defense mechanism, honed over decades of protecting my brother. She tells me now is not the time. She tells me I am being selfish for bringing this up when my brother is in a cage. She repeats it. Now is not the time. Leah. I press the phone harder against my ear. I tell her it is a necessary surgery. I tell her it cannot wait. I tell her I'm in pain. Then, the background noise stops. The shuffling, the crying, the panic, it all goes dead quiet. The phone changes hands. I hear the heavy, rough breathing of my father. Victor does not have my mother's frantic energy. He has ice. He speaks to me not like a daughter, but like a vendor who is interrupting his business day. He tells me that they are emptying the accounts for Mason. I ask him what I'm supposed to do about the hospital deposit. He does not hesitate. His voice is a flat, emotionless hammer. He says, "If one kid has to wait, it will not be Mason." That is the sentence. That is the exact arrangement of words that finally kills the girl I used to be. If one kid has to wait, it will not be Mason. I expect the tears to come. I expect my throat to close up, for the familiar, pathetic sob of the overlooked child to rip out of my chest, but nothing happens. My eyes are dry, my lungs are steady. The air in my kitchen feels perfectly still. The agonizing, sharp pain in my lower abdomen suddenly feels like a dull, distant hum compared to the absolute, freezing void expanding in my chest. I do not cry. I go completely silent. It is as if the very last drop of hope I had for this family just instantly crystallizes, freezes, and shatters into a million invisible pieces on the kitchen floor. I realize, in this exact second, that I am nothing to them. I am an appliance. You do not worry about the refrigerator when the house is on fire. You just expect it to keep running. My father is still on the line, breathing heavily, waiting for me to argue, waiting for me to play my role, to sigh, to accept it, to tell him, I will figure it out and that I hope Mason is okay. I take a slow, deep breath. The voice that comes out of my mouth does not sound like mine. It is hollow. It is smooth. It is terrifyingly calm. I say, "Thank you for letting me know." My father pauses. The response catches him off guard. He starts to say something else, maybe to justify his cruelty, maybe to issue another command. But I do not let him finish. I press the red button. I hang up. I drop the phone onto the kitchen counter. The silence in the apartment is absolute. The physical pain in my body is still there, sharp and relentless, but it shrinks. It becomes entirely insignificant next to the towering, suffocating weight of the humiliation. They chose him. They will always choose him. They will drain their lifeblood to save a son who burns their house down, while watching their daughter bleed to death on the porch. I walk over to the sink. I turn on the cold water. I wash my hands, staring at my reflection in the dark glass of the kitchen window. The woman looking back at me is no longer a daughter. She is an auditor. She is a woman who knows exactly where every single digital key, every password, every compliance document, and every financial lifeline of their business is buried. I know because I am the one who buried them there. I am the one who built their safety net. They think they have survived today. They think the worst thing that happened to them was Mason getting arrested. They have no idea. Within exactly 7 days, that same family will be drowning in a completely different kind of panic. It will not be caused by a screaming match. It will not be a tantrum. It will be the result of an action I take that is completely legal, flawlessly clean, and entirely professional. No lawyer, no judge, and no parent will be able to look at it and call it sabotage. It is simply the withdrawal of my invisible labor. I am just going to give them exactly what they told me I was. Nothing. My days belong to the Riverton Document Conservatory. It is a quiet, meticulously temperature-controlled sanctuary located on the second floor of a restored brick building downtown. I work full-time as an archival specialist. My desk is a haven of absolute order, constantly smelling of methylcellulose adhesive, old leather bindings, and the distinct dry dust of American history. I spend 40 hours a week bent over illuminated magnifying lamps, painstakingly repairing 19th century property deeds, waterlogged municipal zoning maps from the 1950s, and degraded court transcripts that literally crumble at the lightest touch. I deeply, profoundly love this job. There is a sacred rhythm to the work I do there. I take delicate, ruined pieces of paper that have been neglected, abandoned, or heavily damaged by time, and I meticulously bring them back from the brink of total destruction. It gives me a profound sense of purpose to look at something society has written off as irreparable trash and prove, through sheer patience, that it still holds immense structural value. The bitter, Suffocating irony of my life is that between 8 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon, I am fairly compensated to save the broken histories of absolute strangers. But the moment the clock strikes 5, my second shift begins. That is the invisible shift where I retreat to my small apartment, open my personal laptop, and silently save my own family from the catastrophic consequences of their own endless negligence. My parents are the proud owners of Cinderpath Property Recovery. The name looks commanding and highly professional, printed in bold letters on the sides of their heavy-duty fleet trucks. They specialize in commercial disaster mitigation. When a multi-level apartment complex floods due to a burst master pipe, or a suburban office park catches fire, or a corporate landlord discovers black mold creeping up a drywall in a residential unit, Cinderpath is the company they call to rip out the ruin and dry the bones of the building. On paper and to the outside world, my father, Victor, is the seasoned, rugged boss with decades of hard-earned field experience. He wears faded denim, heavy steel-toed boots, and talks with an authoritative rasp about structural drying times, humidity barriers, and moisture mapping. He knows exactly how to command a room full of anxious property managers and adjusters. But that image is a carefully constructed, hollow facade. In the harsh, unforgiving digital reality of modern business, Victor does not even know how to log into a federal contractor portal. He does not know that their $1 million general liability insurance policy requires an intricate annual digital audit to remain active. He has absolutely no idea how to navigate the complex municipal vendor registration systems that keep his company eligible for lucrative city contracts. I am the one who does all of that. I am the invisible mortar holding the crumbling bricks of their company together. I maintain their contractor licenses across 3 different state regulatory boards. I track the expiration dates on the workers' compensation certificates for their constantly rotating crew of independent, often careless subcontractors. When the quarterly payroll tax schedules need to be filed so the federal government does not freeze their operating accounts, my personal cell phone is the one that receives the 2-factor authentication codes. My mother, Diana, occupies an entirely different but equally destructive role in this dysfunctional ecosystem. She is the soft-spoken office manager, the gentle matriarch who never overtly demands my labor. Instead, she extracts it through a delicate, suffocating web of weaponized guilt, whenever the company hits an administrative wall they cannot climb. My phone lights up. She will call me at 8 at night, her voice trembling slightly, talking about how overwhelmed she is. She will launch into rehearsed monologues about how the business is the only thing keeping a roof over their heads, how the economy is punishing small businesses, and how families simply must stick together during hard times. Every single request for me to untangle a hostile vendor dispute, fix a botched insurance invoice, or update a massive compliance form is carefully gift-wrapped in the heavy, unpayable debt of simply being their daughter. And then, hovering above all of us, immune to consequence, is Mason. Whenever my parents introduce my older brother to their friends or business associates, they lower their voices in reverence and declare that he has real business acumen. They talk about him as if he is a misunderstood visionary, a dormant genius, always just one deal away from a massive breakthrough. The reality is aggressively different. Over the past 12 years, Mason has violently pivoted from one disastrous entrepreneurial fantasy to the next. He tried flipping foreclosed properties and ended up owing $30,000 to a crew of unlicensed drywall hangers who threatened physical violence. He started a boutique logistics company that resulted in 2 repossessed box trucks and a mountain of unpaid commercial parking citations. He generates pure chaos, burns through borrowed capital, defaults on his obligations, and leaves behind a sprawling trail of legal and financial wreckage. Whenever his schemes inevitably collapse, my parents rush in with buckets of cash to put out the flames. And then, once the immediate danger has passed, and the bank accounts are severely depleted, they hand me the administrative broom and expect me to quietly sweep up the ashes without asking questions. I have completely lost count of the personal sacrifices I have made to keep Cinderpath afloat over the years. Just 3 months ago, Their primary estimating software subscription was abruptly suspended because Victor lost the corporate credit card and simply forgot to update the billing portal. I put the $900 annual renewal fee on my personal Visa card so the field team could send out emergency bids the very next morning. I have paid exorbitant rush fees to safety equipment suppliers out of my own pocket just to ensure a major job site was not delayed by a critical day. I have sat alone at my kitchen table until 3 in the morning, aggressively rubbing my tired eyes, frantically rewriting a massive municipal bid proposal because Mason, in a rare, misguided attempt to help the family business, decided to drastically embellish their hazardous materials certifications. If the city auditor had caught that blatant fabrication, Cinderpath would have been blacklisted from public contracts for 10 years. It would have effectively killed the company. I caught the lie. I deleted it. I reconstructed the entire bid from scratch using actual, legally sound data and submitted it with 10 minutes to spare before the deadline. When the lucrative contract was awarded to them a week later, I received a text message from my mother containing a single, generic red heart emoji. That was my commission. That was my grand compensation for saving their entire livelihood. Now, as I stand here in my dimly lit kitchen, pressing my hand tightly against the agonizing, twisting pain of the cyst growing inside my body, the thick fog of familial obligation finally lifts. I look back at my entire adult life and see the cold, calculated architecture of my own exploitation. They have always called me the reliable one. They proudly introduced me to extended family at holiday dinners as their rock. For years, I foolishly puffed up with a quiet, pathetic pride whenever I heard those words. I desperately wanted to belong to them, and I thought that label was an expression of deep respect. I truly believed it was their incredibly flawed way of showing love. But the sterile, freezing truth is staring me right in the face today. To the Gonzalez family, being the reliable one is not a compliment. It is a trap. It is the polite, socially acceptable title they assign to a piece of machinery. It is nothing more than their code word for a source of infinite, free labor that is strictly forbidden from breaking down, asking for help, or ever daring to disappear. For 6 solid months, I had been carrying a localized, burning weight in my right side. It started as a dull throb in late October, something I could easily brush off with 2 ibuprofen and a heating pad. By January, there were afternoons at the conservatory where I had to lock myself in a bathroom stall, press my forehead against the cool painted metal of the door, and wait for a wave of nausea to pass. I told my supervisor I was just fatigued. I told myself it was stress. I have spent my adult life gritting my teeth and pushing through discomfort because stopping was never an option. But the ultrasound images did not care about my endless capacity for suffering. The dark and sprawling mass on the monitor forced me to confront a terrifying reality. For the very first time, I could not just suck it up. I could not just try harder. Sitting in the clinic parking lot earlier today, the true source of my panic was not the clinical diagnosis. It was the brutal mental arithmetic. When the billing coordinator handed me the estimate for the pre-surgical deposit and the out-of-pocket maximum, my stomach plummeted. The number printed on that stark white paper was thousands of dollars more than what remained in my checking account. My savings had been meticulously hollowed out over the past 4 years. A few $100s here to cover my parents' missed utility bills, $1,000 there to float their payroll when a commercial client paid late. Every time they fell short, I bridged the gap, quietly draining my own safety net to ensure theirs remained intact. I had financed their dysfunction until there was nothing left to finance my own survival. Now, sitting alone on my faded gray sofa after hanging up that phone, the silence of my apartment is absolute. The evening sun casts long, dusty shadows across the floorboards. In the past, whenever my parents hurt me, my brain would automatically scramble to build a protective barrier of excuses. I would tell myself they were just under an immense amount of pressure. I would rationalize that my brother's legal troubles were objectively more pressing. I would meticulously translate their harsh, dismissive words into a softer, more palatable language so I could swallow them without choking. Not today. Today, the translation matrix is completely broken. I am looking directly at the ugly, unvarnished truth. My mother and father did not act out of temporary panic. They made a clear, conscious calculation. They looked at their daughter's failing health on one side of the scale, and their son's self-inflicted criminal consequences on the other, and they chose him. They chose him without a second of hesitation. The knock on my door is sharp and authoritative. It is not a tentative tap. It is Tessa Rowan. Tessa has been my closest friend since we were 22 years old. She works as a senior contract paralegal for a mid-sized corporate litigation firm downtown. Tessa does not process the world through messy, unpredictable emotions. She views human behavior through the cold, rigid framework of liabilities, clauses, and indemnification. She lets herself in with the spare key I gave her 3 years ago. She takes one look at my face, notes my rigid posture on the sofa, and drops her leather tote bag onto the floor. I tell her everything. I tell her about the clinic, the mass, the cost, and the phone call. I tell her about my father's final sentence. A normal friend would offer a soft blanket, a cup of hot tea, and a shoulder to cry on. Tessa does not do that. She sits in the armchair opposite me, crosses her legs, and looks at me with an expression of terrifying clarity. She does not offer hollow platitudes about how things will get better. Instead, she leans forward and asks me exactly one question. She asks, "Exactly where is your name sitting in that company?" The question hits me like a splash of ice water. It bypasses the emotional wreckage in my chest and strikes a purely logical nerve in my brain. Where is my name? I reach for the laptop resting on the coffee table. I do not open it with shaking hands. I do not open it driven by a fiery, chaotic need for vengeance. I open it with the cold, methodical precision of an investigator arriving at a crime scene. I need to take inventory. I need to measure the exact square footage of the trap I have been living in for the next 2 hours. The only sound in the apartment is the rapid, rhythmic clicking of my keyboard. Tessa sits silently, watching the screen as I pull up digital file after digital file. The deeper I dig into the architecture of Cinderpath property recovery, the more horrifying the reality becomes. I start with the municipal vendor portals. My personal email address is listed as the primary administrative contact for 3 different local government databases. If the city needs to verify a hazardous materials permit, the automated notification comes directly to my phone. I move to the insurance brokers. My digital signature, an old file I generated 5 years ago to help them rush a document, is still actively attached to their annual workers' compensation renewal forms. I am listed as the authorized compliance liaison for their $1 million umbrella policy. It does not stop there. I check the payroll processor. The 2-factor authentication codes required to finalize the weekly direct deposits for their field crew are routed exclusively to my cell phone number. I log into the commercial vehicle registration accounts. My personal credit card is still saved as the backup payment method for the GPS tracking software installed in all 4 of their fleet trucks. The sheer volume of it makes my chest tight. I am not just the girl who occasionally helps her parents with difficult paperwork. I am the foundational operating system of their entire enterprise. My name, my contact information, and my personal credibility are the load-bearing pillars holding up every single contract, every policy, and every vendor relationship they have. They have woven my identity so deeply into their corporate compliance structure that it is impossible to tell where Leah Gonzalez ends and Cinderpath property recovery begins. I stare at the bright screen, the cursor blinking steadily at the end of a master vendor agreement. The physical pain in my abdomen flares up, a sharp reminder of the rotting thing growing inside me. But as I look at the sprawling digital web of my own exploitation, I realize the cyst is not the only parasitic growth threatening my life. My family has been feeding off my invisible labor, my clean record, and my desperate need for their approval for over a decade. They assumed I would always be there, absorbing their stress, paying their late fees, and keeping their lights on while they poured their actual love and resources into Mason. Tessa breaks the silence. She looks at the screen, then looks at me. She states, simply and factually, that I am the entire compliance department. I close the laptop. The click of the screen shutting sounds like a lock snapping into place. I am not going to scream at them. I am not going to beg them to love me. I am simply going to remove my foundation and let gravity do the rest. We did not start with a screaming match. We did not start with a fiery confrontation or a dramatic declaration of independence. Revenge, in the traditional sense, is incredibly sloppy. It is an emotional hemorrhage that leaves you looking unstable and gives the other party a convenient excuse to play the victim. I did not want to give my family the satisfaction of calling me hysterical. I wanted something much colder. I wanted an extraction. It was 11:15 at night when Tessa returned from my tiny kitchen, carrying 2 mugs of black coffee. She set one down next to my laptop and pulled a yellow legal pad from her tote bag. She clicked her pen, the sharp sound cutting through the heavy silence of the apartment. She told me that if I simply walked away and stopped answering my phone, my father would immediately spin the narrative. He would tell their clients, their vendors, and their extended network that I had suffered a mental breakdown and abandoned the family business in a fit of irrational spite. He would weaponize my absence. To prevent that, Tessa explained, I needed to build a paper trail so dense, so meticulously organized, and so legally sound that no one could ever accuse me of sabotage. I had to hand them a complete working manual and let them undermine themselves with it. We began the inventory. For the next 4 hours, we sat shoulder to shoulder, mapping out the sprawling, parasitic root system my family had embedded into my personal life. We created a master spreadsheet. We categorized every single digital doorway, every recurring financial obligation, and every compliance checkpoint that was currently resting entirely on my shoulders. The deeper we excavated, the more horrifying the architecture of their survival became. I was not just pushing paperwork, I was actively laundering their professional incompetence. I found the master file for a highly lucrative municipal vendor contract with the County Public Works Department. The only reason Cinderpath Property Recovery had passed the grueling, multi-tiered vetting process for that contract was because I had linked my own spotless digital credential history to the application. The county required a strict 48-hour turnaround for all compliance audits and safety addendums. My father did not even know how to open a compressed folder. My brother could barely string a professional email together without sounding like a desperate salesman. I was the ghost in the machine, anticipating the bureaucratic hurdles, filling out the safety metric reports at 2 a.m, and maintaining an illusion of corporate stability that simply did not exist. Tessa guided me through the separation process with the clinical detachment of a forensic accountant. We started with the finances. I logged into the master dashboard of their fleet management software. There was a recurring monthly charge of $485 for the GPS tracking and dispatch system installed in their trucks. The payment method on file was my personal credit card. I had linked it 2 years ago when their corporate card was declined for insufficient funds, and I had simply never been permitted to take it off. I clicked the billing tab. I deleted my card information. I left the payment field completely blank. I moved to the commercial supply accounts. I unlinked my checking account from the industrial chemical supplier they used for mold remediation. I removed my name as the financial guarantor for their heavy equipment rental portal. I canceled the premium software subscription they used to generate structural drawing estimates, a subscription that cost me $120 every single month. By the time I finished the financial extraction, I had clawed back nearly $800 in recurring monthly liabilities that my parents had comfortably accepted as their divine right. Next came the compliance withdrawal. This was the mechanism that would truly tear the roof off their operation. I drafted a formal, perfectly sterile letter of resignation. I did not use the word family. I did not mention my brother, the casino, or the bail money. I certainly did not mention the complex cyst twisting inside my ovary or the surgery I was desperately trying to afford. I kept the language entirely restricted to corporate governance. I stated that, effective immediately, I was permanently relinquishing all administrative, operational, and compliance responsibilities for Cinderpath Property Recovery. I outlined that I would no longer act as the authorized point of contact for any vendor, subcontractor, or municipal entity. Tessa insisted that we package the transitions so flawlessly that their inevitable failure would be entirely their own fault. I spent 2 hours exporting every single crucial piece of data they would need to survive. I downloaded the master lists of insurance renewal dates, the login credentials for the state contractor licensing boards, the open invoice ledgers, and the safety compliance deadlines. I organized everything into dozens of clearly labeled digital folders. I created a comprehensive timeline showing exactly what documents were due within the next 30, 60, and 90 days. I built a lifeboat out of data, knowing full well they did not possess the navigational skills to row it. Then, we initiated the external notifications. This was the step that elevated my actions from a family dispute to a legally binding reality. I could not just tell my father I was quitting. I had to tell the institutions that governed his ability to make money. I opened a new email to their primary commercial insurance broker. I attached my formal notice and clearly requested that my name, my personal cell phone number, and my electronic signature be immediately purged from all active general liability and workers' compensation policies. I sent a similar, highly formalized notification to the county procurement office, officially withdrawing myself as the compliance liaison for their municipal contracts. I systematically closed the external valves, one by one. I ensured that the very next time an auditor, an adjuster, or a vendor had a critical problem, the automated alert would bypass my phone entirely and land directly in the wasteland of my father's ignored inbox. By 3:45 in the morning, the spreadsheet was complete, the financial ties were severed, the external authorities had been notified. The only thing left was the internal handover. I drafted the final email to Victor, Diana, and Mason. I attached a secure link to the massive archive of transition folders we had just built. My message was 3 sentences long. I informed them that all operational data, login credentials, and upcoming deadlines had been compiled in the attached directory. I stated that my resignation as their administrative coordinator was effective immediately, and that all future compliance inquiries would need to be managed internally by their own staff. I ended it by stating that the transition file would remain active for exactly 48 hours before the link expired. I stared at the screen. The blue glow illuminated Tessa's face as she watched me from the armchair. My finger hovered over the trackpad. For a fleeting fraction of a second, the deeply ingrained, lifelong conditioning flared up in my chest. A heavy wave of guilt tried to convince me that I was destroying my parents, that I was a bad daughter, that I should just take an ibuprofen, go to sleep, and fix everything for them in the morning. But then I felt the sharp, hot stab of pain in my lower abdomen. I remembered the exact, flat tone of my father's voice telling me that if one kid had to wait, it would not be the criminal sitting in a holding cell. The guilt instantly evaporated, replaced by a crystalline, absolute certainty. I was not sabotaging them. I was not burning their building down. I was simply handing them the keys to their own house and walking out the front door. I pressed the trackpad down. The email sent with a soft, digitized swoosh. The screen refreshed, showing an empty outbox. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled a long, shaky breath, and felt the heavy, suffocating chains of a 34-year-old debt finally slip off my shoulders and crash to the floor. I woke up to a single text message from my brother at 7 in the morning. He was out on bail, sleeping off a hangover in his luxury downtown loft, while my parents stared blankly at their entirely decimated savings accounts. His message was predictably arrogant, typed out with the casual annoyance of someone who had never faced a genuine consequence in his entire life. He told me to stop throwing a tantrum. He typed that our mother was stressed enough, and that I needed to fix the compliance portal before our father blew a gasket. Mason actually believed this was a temporary strike. He thought I was just holding my breath, engaging in some dramatic, emotional protest, and that within a few days, I would inevitably cave, log back in, and clean up his mess. He was incredibly wrong. By noon, the structural integrity of Cinderpath Property Recovery began to violently collapse in real time. I was sitting at my restoration desk at the conservatory, delicately applying a specialized solvent to a 19th century zoning map, when my phone screen began to light up. I had placed the device on silent, turning it face up on the edge of the table. I watched the panic visually unfold, a cascading waterfall of notifications, missed calls, and frantic text messages arriving in rapid succession. At 1:15 in the afternoon, my mother left a breathless, high-pitched voicemail. The commercial insurance broker had called her directly. They had received my formally drafted withdrawal letter and had immediately flagged the company's million-dollar umbrella policy for an emergency compliance review. The automated system required an updated, authorized digital signature to maintain coverage, and the broker was demanding to know why their primary contact had abruptly severed ties. Diana was practically hyperventilating on the recording, begging me to call the broker back and tell them it was a simple administrative misunderstanding. 30 minutes later, a text message from my father arrived. It was typed entirely in capital letters, devoid of any punctuation. He was standing on a site walkthrough for a massive residential contract, and the corporate property management firm was flatly refusing to sign the final authorization to commence work. The authorized compliance liaison listed on their newly integrated vendor profile no longer matched the digital signature on the submitted bid. I had revoked my authorization that morning. Victor was locked out of the system, standing in front of a furious regional manager, completely unable to explain why his own company's paperwork had suddenly invalidated itself. At 3 o'clock, the operational hemorrhage spread to the field crews. A sprawling, 200-unit apartment complex in the West Valley abruptly halted a massive water mitigation deployment. Cinderpath's field technicians were literally standing in the asphalt parking lot, leaning against their heavy-duty trucks loaded with industrial dehumidifiers. But the property manager barred them from crossing the threshold into the buildings. The complex required an active certificate of liability, explicitly naming the authorized guarantor before any contractor could enter a residential unit. My deliberate withdrawal had voided their site clearance. Every single hour those trucks sat idle in the parking lot was burning hundreds of dollars in unbillable labor and equipment costs. Then, at exactly 4:30, the absolute worst-case scenario for any small business owner struck. The cloud-based payroll software automatically locked the master corporate ledger. The system had triggered a routine security protocol, requiring a two-factor authentication code to process the weekly direct deposits for 14 field technicians. That code was routed directly to my personal cell phone. I was the sole network administrator. Victor did not know the login username. He did not know the security questions, and he certainly did not know the master password. If those 14 men did not receive their wages by Friday morning, they would walk off the job sites, and the business would instantly paralyze. Over the span of 8 agonizing hours, I received 42 text messages and 11 separate voicemails from my immediate family. My father roared into the microphone, his voice thick with a terrifying rage, demanding I fix the portals immediately. My mother wept, leaving long, rambling messages about loyalty and ruination. Mason hurled vulgar insults via text, calling me a vindictive traitor who was trying to destroy the family out of petty jealousy. But as I sat there in the quiet archive room, reading every single word and listening to every frantic recording, a freezing, hollow realization settled deep into my bones. In 42 text messages and 11 voicemails, not a single person asked if I was okay. Not one of them asked about the complex cyst. Not one of them asked if I was in pain, or if I had managed to secure a date for the urgent surgery I desperately needed. My failing body was entirely irrelevant to them. Only my severed utility mattered. I left work at exactly 5 o'clock. By 6:15, there was a frantic, desperate pounding on the door of my apartment. It was not the polite knock of a visitor. It was the frantic hammering of someone demanding entry. I walked over, holding my hand tightly against my lower abdomen where the sharp, burning ache had flared up again, and looked through the peephole. It was Diana. She looked completely hollowed out. Her expensive beige cardigan was rumpled. Her carefully styled hair was disheveled and dark. Heavy streaks of ruined mascara stained the fragile skin beneath her eyes. She possessed a highly weaponized kind of exhaustion, a trembling, pathetic demeanor that was specifically designed to make anyone looking at her feel like an absolute monster for refusing to help. I unlocked the deadbolt, but did not swing the door wide open. I stood squarely in the narrow frame, physically blocking the entrance to my sanctuary. My mother looked up at my face, her eyes wide, red, and pleading. I waited for it. I braced myself for the remote possibility that standing face to face with her sick, exhausted daughter might finally trigger some dormant, buried maternal instinct. I waited for her to ask how I was feeling. Instead, she reached out, grabbed the edge of the wooden doorframe with trembling fingers, and spoke. She said, "Leah, please, just log into the payroll system and help us for a few days until we sort this mess out." There it was. No hello, no inquiry about the clinic, no acknowledgement of the brutal conversation we had just yesterday. I looked at her, and the very last frayed thread connecting my heart to hers simply dissolved into dust. I kept my voice perfectly level. I did not raise it. I did not cry. I told her that I had sent the master transition files. I told her that every single password, every vendor contact, and every impending compliance deadline was neatly organized in the digital directory currently sitting in her email inbox. I stated, clearly and unequivocally, that if they lacked the administrative capacity to run their own commercial enterprise, they needed to hire a professional operations manager. The most agonizing twist of the entire evening was not her blinding selfishness. It was the genuine, profound confusion washing over her tear-stained face. Even standing there, 24 hours after my father had explicitly chosen Mason's freedom over my physical survival, my mother still firmly believed that her access to my labor was a fundamental law of the universe. She truly, deeply believed that no matter how brutally they discarded my humanity, my ultimate purpose on this earth was to swallow my pain, crawl back to my keyboard, and save them from the dark. Tessa parked her sedan, leaving the engine idling near the rusted chain-link fence of the Cinderpath equipment yard. It was 6 p.m. The harsh glare of the halogen security lights cut through the descending dusk. I unbuckled my seatbelt. Tessa did not turn off the car. She simply looked at me, tapped her fingers on the steering wheel, and stated that she would be waiting right here. She added that if I was not back out in exactly 20 minutes, she was coming inside. I walked across the cracked, uneven asphalt. The main warehouse bay doors were rolled down and padlocked, so I entered through the side office entrance. The air inside the building was thick, stagnant, and entirely unchanged from my childhood. It smelled aggressively of industrial degreaser, scorched ozone from the commercial air scrubbers, and the suffocating, heavy pressure of 1,000 unpaid bills. My father had summoned me here via a hostile text message, demanding I show up so we could sit down and talk like adults. When I pushed open the heavy wooden door to his cramped back office, I found the 3 of them waiting for me. Victor was sitting behind his battered metal desk, his massive hands planted flat on the scarred surface. Diana was perched nervously on the very edge of a folding chair, clutching a styrofoam coffee cup like it was a lifeline. And Mason was slouched deep into the corner of a torn leather sofa, one leg thrown casually over the armrest, tapping away at his smartphone. He looked incredibly bored. He looked exactly like a man who had entirely forgotten he was wearing police handcuffs just 5 days ago. Victor gestured sharply toward an empty wooden chair positioned in the dead center of the room. He commanded me to sit down. I stayed exactly where I was, standing firmly just inside the doorframe. The physical distance felt absolutely necessary. Victor did not like my defiance. His face flushed a dark, angry red. He immediately launched into the offensive, adopting the booming, authoritative tone he successfully used to terrify unpaid subcontractors. He started listing the damage. He shouted that my little tantrum had cost them thousands of dollars in a single afternoon. He accused me of deliberately sabotaging a massive residential dryout because the property managers had legally locked his crews out of the building. He slammed his fist onto the desk, demanding to know what kind of vindictive daughter actively tries to bankrupt her own parents. Mason let out a loud, theatrical sigh from his corner. He did not even bother to look up from his glowing screen. He muttered that I was just being dramatic, that I needed to get over myself, and that I should just fix the login screens so everyone could move on with their lives. I looked at my older brother. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement radiating from his posture was breathtaking. I turned my attention back to Victor. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with a rapid, razor-sharp precision that instantly cut through his booming echoes. I told him to stop talking. I did not wait for his permission. I started listing my history, firing the words across the small room. I told them about the 3 state contractor licenses I renewed every single year while they slept. I listed the quarterly payroll taxes I meticulously calculated and filed so the IRS would not freeze their operating accounts. I named the subcontractor liability certificates I chased down, the aggressive insurance claims I fought and won, and the municipal vendor renewals I routinely forged their digital signatures on because neither of them could remember a basic password. I reminded them of the 50-page municipal bid proposals I drafted at 2 a.m. so they could afford to bail Mason out of his endless disasters. Diana flinched. She set her coffee cup down on a filing cabinet, her hands shaking visibly. She used her softest, most manipulative voice. She said, "Sweetheart, please, no one in this room is denying that you have helped us tremendously over the years." I snapped my gaze directly to her. I told her to never use that word again. I told her that bringing over a tray of food when someone is sick is help. Picking someone up from the airport is help. What I provided them was not help. It was structural, foundational labor. I was the entire operational spine of a commercial enterprise I did not even own. The room went dead quiet for a fraction of a second. The sharp, burning ache in my right side flared up, a brutal, physical reminder of why we were actually standing here. I pressed my hand against my jacket, right over the pain, and stepped forward. I looked at all 3 of them. I asked the only question that actually mattered. I asked them why. Since the exact moment everything exploded, not a single one of them had bothered to ask me if I was okay. The silence that followed was absolute. It was thick, heavy, and physically agonizing. It was a silence that confirmed every single terrible thing I already knew to be true. Mason finally looked up from his phone, his brow furrowed in genuine, pathetic confusion. Diana looked down at her lap, unable to meet my eyes. Victor just stared at me, his jaw locked tight. That absolute silence hurt worse than any insult they could have possibly hurled at my face. I broke the quiet. I told them that my surgery was scheduled for exactly 4 days from now. I stated that I would be walking into a hospital, signing a massive financial liability waiver, and having a complex mass removed from my body completely alone. I told them that the exact moment they decided to drain the family accounts to shield Mason from the legal consequences of his own violent actions, while casually telling me to figure out my own medical emergency, every single invisible obligation I had to this family was permanently terminated. Victor exploded. The brief flash of guilt I had cornered him with mutated instantly into a vicious, cornered rage. He stood up so fast his heavy chair knocked backward into the wall. He pointed a thick, trembling finger directly at my face. He screamed that I had no idea what I was doing. He shouted that if I did not immediately restore my name and credentials to the master portal, they were going to lose the North Crest Private School District restoration package. The words hung in the stale air. North Crest. My mind raced. I knew the North Crest file perfectly. It was a massive, multi-year contract they had miraculously secured 6 months ago. But I also knew the strict municipal requirements for that specific school district. They required an absolutely flawless, 10-year personal financial guarantor profile to even submit a preliminary bid. Victor had filed for bankruptcy 7 years ago. Mason possessed a criminal record and completely destroyed credit. I stared at my father, the final, sickening puzzle piece sliding into its awful place. I asked him, very slowly, exactly whose financial profile he had attached to the North Crest compliance addendum. Victor's face went pale. He realized his catastrophic mistake the second the words left his mouth. He stammered, his booming voice suddenly weak, trying to walk it back. He tried to say it was just a temporary placeholder, just a standard bureaucratic workaround that everyone in the industry used. They had not just exploited my free labor, they had actively leveraged my clean legal identity, my unblemished credit history, and my spotless professional reputation to secure a contract they had absolutely no legal right to touch. They were wearing my identity like a stolen suit. A wave of pure, icy clarity washed over me. I did not feel angry anymore. I just felt incredibly clean. I looked at my father. I told him that I was not going to argue with him. I told him that at precisely 3 o'clock this afternoon, my retained attorney had initiated formal legal proceedings to immediately and permanently strike my name, my electronic signature, and my personal financial data from every single contract Cinderpath Property Recovery currently held. I informed them that formal cease and desist letters were already in the mail. Mason dropped his phone onto the floor. Diana let out a sharp, pathetic gasp. I did not wait for their response. I turned my back on them, walked out of the suffocating office, and pushed the heavy metal door open into the cool evening air. I walked across the dark asphalt toward Tessa's idling car, leaving my family entirely alone in the warehouse to finally listen to the deafening sound of their own fraudulent system cracking wide open. I secured the hospital deposit entirely on my own. It required a humiliating 2-hour phone call with a hospital billing coordinator to establish a 36-month payment plan, coupled with a generous 6-week salary advance granted by the director of the Riverton Document Conservatory. Tessa took the morning off to drive me to the surgical center. At 5:30 in the morning, sitting on the edge of a narrow, paper-lined hospital bed, wearing a thin, sterile gown, the ambient temperature of the room made me shiver. But the deepest, most profound ache in my chest had absolutely nothing to do with the impending scalpel. It was the crushing realization that as I prepared to be put under general anesthesia, completely vulnerable and entirely alone in my family structure, my parents were likely sitting at their kitchen table, furious that their favorite appliance was temporarily out of order. Waking up in the recovery ward was a hazy, painful blur. My abdomen felt as though it had been hollowed out and filled with hot lead. Tessa was sitting in the plastic chair beside my bed, typing quietly on her phone. She did not offer pity. She just handed me a small cup of ice chips and told me I survived. It was not until the next afternoon, comfortably propped up on the pillows of my own living room sofa, that I finally checked my cell phone. There were exactly 2 messages from my family. The first was from my mother. It was a brief, sterile text stating she heard the surgery went well. She did not ask if I was in pain. She did not ask if I needed food. The second message was from Victor. He did not bother with a greeting. He simply asked when I would be lucid enough to log in and process the remaining vendor compliance forms. I locked the screen and set the device on the coffee table. The physical pain of the incisions was sharp, but the emotional clarity I felt was absolute. I was no longer a daughter. I was just a malfunctioning piece of administrative software they were impatiently waiting to reboot. While I spent the next 3 days carefully navigating the short distance between my sofa and the kitchen, the external consequences of my absence began to strike Cinderpath Property Recovery with brutal efficiency. The commercial insurance broker, thoroughly spooked by my sudden withdrawal and the lack of a verified replacement, officially reassigned their risk profile. Their monthly premium doubled. A major industrial equipment supplier, noting the sudden administrative chaos, revoked their Net 30 payment terms and demanded cash on delivery for all future rentals. The massive North Crest private school district contract remained frozen in a bureaucratic purgatory, entirely suspended because Victor could not produce a legally binding guarantor to replace me. The pressure cooker finally exploded on the 4th evening. The heavy, aggressive pounding on my apartment door made my heart race. Tessa had just left to pick up groceries. I cautiously walked to the door, pressing a hand against my bandaged side, and looked through the peephole. It was Mason. He looked completely unhinged. I opened the door exactly 3 inches, leaving the heavy brass chain firmly secured. Mason did not greet me. He pressed his face near the opening and unleashed a venomous tirade. He shouted that my petty little legal stunt was tearing the family apart. He yelled that the bank was threatening to pull their commercial credit line. In his blind, arrogant rage, Mason's mouth moved faster than his brain. He started screaming about how the accountants were now demanding an internal audit because the subcontractors were threatening to walk. He angrily blurted out that Victor was scrambling to hide the fact that the equipment rental slips and the finalized client invoices from the past 6 months did not match up. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Mismatched invoices and equipment slips meant they were billing commercial clients for heavy machinery they never actually rented, or they were pocketing the difference from the subcontractors. It was textbook vendor fraud. And for the past 6 months, my name had been signed as the compliance officer overseeing those exact files. I slammed the door in his face. I did not say a single word. I locked the deadbolt and immediately reached for my phone to call my attorney. What my lawyer discovered the following morning was far worse than Mason's accidental confession. It completely eradicated whatever lingering, microscopic shred of guilt I still held on to. My attorney had run a comprehensive digital sweep of the municipal vendor portals to ensure my name had been thoroughly purged. He found a brand new submission. Exactly 48 hours after I stood in that dusty warehouse and explicitly told Victor I was revoking all consent. My father had submitted a highly classified financial disclosure packet to the County Public Works Department. Under the section mandating a certified compliance contact, Victor had boldly typed my full name, my personal phone number, and my home address. It escalated from pure negligence to active criminality on the final page. Attached to the submission was a digital PDF appendix acknowledging the strict liability terms of the contract. Stamped at the very bottom of that document was my electronic signature. It was an old, low-resolution image file I had used 3 years ago to authorize a routine supply delivery. Victor had copied the image, pasted it onto a legally binding government document I had never seen, and submitted it to the county as a sworn verification. This was not some sensational, dramatic twist you see in a thriller. It was the terrifying, mundane audacity of a family that had spent a decade treating my identity as community property. They had used my name for so long that the fundamental concept of my personal consent no longer existed in their minds. To Victor, stealing my signature to secure a public contract was no different than borrowing a pen from my desk. Sitting at my kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea, I felt a deep, chilling calm wash over me. I opened my laptop and joined a video call with my attorney. I instructed him to stop playing defense. I authorized him to draft a formal, legally binding warning letter and send it via certified mail to Victor, Diana, Mason, and their corporate legal counsel. The terms were absolute. The letter explicitly stated that any past, present, or future use of my name, my personal information, my financial history, or my digital signature on any CinderPath document without my direct, written consent would be immediately reported to the State Attorney General as corporate identity theft and fraud. I was cutting the final, rotting cord. They wanted to run a business without me. Now, they were going to have to survive the legal system without my shield. The county procurement agency did not take my formal withdrawal lightly. When they received my certified notice, and subsequently compared it to the freshly forged compliance packet my father had desperately submitted, their automated system triggered an immediate red flag. A government contract cannot possess two conflicting authorized liaisons, especially when one is actively threatening legal action for identity fraud. The agency immediately suspended the entire bidding process. They demanded an independent, third-party audit of CinderPath Property Recovery's operational structure. My father could no longer scream his way out of this bureaucratic nightmare. He was forced to hire an expensive corporate defense attorney and an external forensic accountant just to answer the county's preliminary inquiries. The invisible labor he had utilized for free was now costing him hundreds of dollars an hour in billable legal fees. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 10 days after my surgery, that my phone rang. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, carefully reviewing my hospital billing statements. The caller ID displayed my mother's number. I almost let it go to voicemail, expecting another hysterical, manipulative performance. But when I cautiously answered, The voice on the other end was startlingly hollow. Diana did not launch into a rehearsed monologue about family loyalty. She simply asked if I was well enough to meet her for a cup of coffee. She sounded completely depleted, as if the heavy, suffocating illusion she had maintained for over 3 decades had finally collapsed on top of her. I agreed, choosing a quiet, dimly lit, independent cafe located 3 miles away from my apartment, a neutral territory where she could not cause a scene. I arrived 15 minutes early. My abdomen still throbbed with a dull, persistent ache whenever I moved too quickly. A constant physical reminder of the boundaries I had to protect. When my mother walked through the glass door of the cafe, she looked 10 years older. The polished, soft-spoken matriarch was gone. She ordered a black coffee, sat across from me in the corner booth, and stared at the scratched wooden table for a long time. When she finally spoke, her words were slow, heavy, and completely stripped of their usual emotional armor. She did not ask me to come back to the company. Instead, she offered a confession. She looked at my hands resting on the table and admitted that for my entire adult life, she and my father had intentionally built their entire reality around the absolute certainty that I would always be there to catch whatever they dropped. That was not the most devastating truth she brought to the table. She took a slow, trembling breath and told me that she needed to clear her conscience about the morning I called her from the clinic. The morning I begged for a deposit to save my failing body. The story they had yelled over the phone was that they were draining their accounts solely to pay a bondsman and a criminal defense lawyer for Mason. That was a lie. Diana looked me dead in the eye and confessed that the bail was only a small fraction of the crisis. Mason had secretly borrowed a massive sum of money from an unofficial, highly dangerous private lender to fund his disastrous underground gambling habits. When he was arrested, that violent lender immediately called my father, threatening catastrophic consequences if the debt was not settled in full within 24 hours. The math clicked into place with sickening clarity. My parents had not simply run out of money. They had taken every single dollar of their life savings, every emergency fund, every safety net they possessed, and willingly handed it over to a loan shark. They had actively, consciously prioritized paying off my brother's violent criminal debt over securing a surgical room for my agonizing medical emergency. They had valued protecting Mason from the very worst of his own self-inflicted choices far more than they valued my actual physical survival. The sheer magnitude of that betrayal settled over me like a heavy, freezing blanket. Diana was not finished. She lowered her voice to a fragile whisper and addressed the cease and desist letter my attorney had sent regarding the forged county documents. She admitted that she knew Victor had copied my old digital signature. She had watched him attach my name to the municipal compliance appendix after I had explicitly resigned. I asked her, keeping my voice perfectly flat and devoid of any emotion, how she could possibly justify letting him commit federal identity theft against her own daughter. Her answer was the most chilling thing I had ever heard. She said she truly believed I was just having a temporary breakdown. She firmly believed that, given a week or two, I would eventually come to my senses, return to my desk, and silently clean up the paperwork just like I always did. She did not see it as forgery. She saw it as temporarily borrowing my compliance until I inevitably resumed my designated role as their property. She sat there, her hands clasped tightly around her warm ceramic mug, waiting for the confession to do its usual work. In the past, whenever she showed vulnerability, I would instantly soften. I would reach across the table, hold her hand, and tell her we would figure it out together, but the woman sitting across from her now was fundamentally altered. Her words did not crack my resolve. They cemented it. Her confession merely confirmed that their cruelty was not a momentary lapse in judgment induced by panic. It was a deeply entrenched, systemic entitlement. They viewed me as an asset, a utility, a resource to be mined until it was entirely depleted. I did not raise my voice. I did not hurl insults, nor did I shed a single tear. I did not dramatically stand up and storm out of the cafe. I simply sat there, feeling the steady rhythm of my own breathing, and looked at the woman who had brought me into the world. I told her that I appreciated her finally telling me the truth, but I added with absolute, unbreakable certainty, knowing the truth did not mean I was ever going to return to save them. I told her that the structure they had built was entirely theirs, and if it was currently collapsing under the weight of their own incompetence and my brother's criminality, they would have to learn how to survive the rubble on their own. I left enough cash on the table to cover the 2 coffees, stood up carefully to protect my healing incisions, and walked out of the cafe, leaving her completely alone in the quiet booth. The bright afternoon sun felt incredibly warm against my skin as I walked toward my car. For the first time in my entire life, I felt absolutely no obligation to look back. I had survived the extraction. I was finally free of the crushing gravity of their endless crises. I slid into the driver's seat and turned the key in the ignition. As the engine rumbled to life, my cell phone vibrated violently against the center console. I glanced down at the illuminated screen. It was a text message from Victor. It was not an apology. It was a vicious, capitalized threat, dripping with the cornered panic of a man who was rapidly losing his empire. The message accused me of dragging internal family business out into the public square by involving corporate lawyers and the county procurement office. He told me I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, completely unaware that the line had been erased the moment he told me my life was worth less than his son's gambling debt. The tone of his message was clear. The quiet phase of my withdrawal was officially over. A much larger, far more destructive collision was rapidly approaching. The phone call from my legal counsel arrived at exactly 9 a.m. on a Thursday. He did not waste any time with standard pleasantries. He immediately informed me that his paralegal had just finished a comprehensive review of the discovery documents provided by the county procurement office. They were analyzing the emergency financial restructuring packet my father had hastily compiled to salvage the suspended public works contract. Buried deep within the appendices, my lawyer found a draft application for a massive commercial home equity line of credit. It was a desperate maneuver designed to inject liquid capital into the rapidly hemorrhaging business. Under the specific section designated for the secondary financial guarantor, my full legal name, my social security number, and my impeccable credit history were neatly typed out. There was no forged electronic signature resting on the dotted line this time. Victor had not yet crossed that specific, highly illegal threshold again. But the sheer existence of that draft document sent a freezing current straight down my spine. Even after the formal cease and desist letter, even after the county violently froze their bidding status, my parents were still operating under the fundamental, unshakable delusion that I was their personal property. They were building an entire financial rescue strategy around the absolute assumption that when the pressure finally reached a critical boiling point, I would inevitably break. They believed I would walk into a bank, sign the loan documents, and permanently tether my own financial future to their sinking ship. They had not stopped using me. They were simply waiting for me to surrender. Victor's offensive escalated by the hour. My voicemail inbox quickly filled to absolute capacity with a bipolar, chaotic barrage of messages. In one recording, his voice was a booming, terrifying roar, aggressively threatening to sue me for breach of fiduciary duty and corporate sabotage. In the very next message, arriving exactly 20 minutes later, he sounded like a cornered, panicked animal. He pleaded with me to attend a final, emergency summit. He had somehow managed to secure a corporate boardroom at his accountant's office for Friday afternoon. The commercial insurance broker was scheduled to be there, along with the powerful regional director from the North Crest Private School District. Victor begged me to just show up, sit quietly at the mahogany table, and tell the gathered stakeholders that my sudden withdrawal was merely a temporary, highly emotional administrative misunderstanding. He desperately wanted me to glue the mask back onto my face for one last, face-saving performance. Mason adopted an entirely different, yet equally insidious strategy. My brother sent a rapid string of text messages that initiated with a hollow, poorly constructed apology. He typed that he felt terribly about the underground casino incident and that things had just gotten wildly out of hand. But within exactly 3 sentences, the faux remorse entirely evaporated. he violently pivoted to heavy, weaponized guilt. He typed that our mother was barely sleeping, that she was crying every single day, and that my stubborn, vindictive refusal to just click a few buttons on a computer was going to get their family home foreclosed on. He masterfully framed my basic act of self-preservation as an act of absolute, unprovoked malice. I sat on my sofa, staring blindly at the incoming barrage of notifications, feeling the deeply familiar, deeply conditioned urge to fold inward. For 34 years, that combined, suffocating pressure from the three of them had worked flawlessly to keep me exactly where they needed me. Tessa arrived shortly after she finished her shift at the law firm, bringing my attorney with her. They sat across from me at my small dining table, meticulously reviewing the new demands. I crossed my arms over my chest and told them I was absolutely not going to that meeting. I told them my stomach physically turned at the thought of sitting in a sealed room, silently watching Victor try to aggressively charm his way out of an active fraud investigation. My lawyer slowly shook his head. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, and explicitly told me that ignoring the meeting was the worst possible strategic move I could make. He explained that if I did not appear, Victor would completely control the narrative within those four walls. He would expertly paint me as a disgruntled, mentally unstable employee who had maliciously stolen corporate data in a fit of misplaced rage. Tessa reached across the table and placed her hand firmly over mine. She looked directly at me with her cold, hyper-analytical eyes. She stated that I was not walking into that boardroom to save Cinderpath property recovery. I was going to walk in there to permanently sever the rotting limb. I was going to put my absolute truth on the official, undeniable legal record, directly in front of the exact financial stakeholders my father was currently trying to defraud. I took a slow breath. Absorbing her words, I agreed. And then, I meticulously prepared for war. I did not pack emotions. I packed hard, undeniable data. I spent 6 continuous hours compiling a physical heavy leather binder of absolute destruction. I printed out the comprehensive, heavily documented timeline of my digital emails. I printed the time-stamped master handover directory we had built on the very first night. I took high-resolution screenshots of the 2-factor authentication portals, definitively proving I was the sole network administrator for a decade. I printed a fresh copy of my formal resignation letter, neatly paired with the certified postal delivery receipts. I printed out the vicious, demanding text messages from my father, alongside the guilt-laden, manipulative paragraphs from my brother. The final, most devastating document I placed into the protective plastic sleeve at the back of the binder was the official intake form from the surgical clinic. It clearly, indisputably displayed the exact date and the precise hour I was admitted for my medical procedure. It was the undeniable, physical proof that while my family was desperately forging my name to illegally secure a municipal contract, I was lying entirely unconscious on a sterile operating table, completely abandoned by the people claiming I was vital to their survival. By Thursday evening, the inevitable industry fallout had thoroughly breached the perimeter. The East Valley property management community is remarkably small, fiercely competitive, and incredibly prone to rapid gossip. A former professional colleague, a woman who managed a massive commercial real estate portfolio downtown, sent me a direct message. She asked if I had intentionally jumped ship, noting that aggressive rumors were actively circulating that Cinderpath was currently failing baseline vendor audits and bouncing subcontractor checks across 3 different metropolitan zip codes. The grand illusion of my father's rugged, invincible company was rapidly dissolving in the real world. The structural, internal rot was finally visible to the naked eye. At exactly 11:15 that night, the screen of my phone illuminated brightly in the dark silence of my bedroom. It was a single text message from Diana. It contained absolutely no apologies, no soft manipulation, and no desperate begging. It was just one solitary sentence. It was, without question, the most brutally honest thing she had ever communicated to me in my entire life. She typed, "Your father never believed you could actually leave." I lay in the dark, staring at the glowing white words until the screen eventually timed out and went black. I did not type a reply. The absolute tragedy of her statement required no response. The next morning, I woke up incredibly early. The physical ache in my right side was sharp, a persistent, burning sensation stretching tightly across my healing internal incisions. I walked into the kitchen and swallowed 2 over-the-counter painkillers with a tall glass of cold water. I dressed in a meticulously tailored, charcoal gray suit that I usually strictly reserved for high-level archival grant presentations. I pulled my hair back into a tight, immaculate knot at the base of my neck. I picked up the heavy leather binder resting on my kitchen counter, feeling the physical weight of my own liberation in my hands. I walked out to my car. The drive to the accountant's downtown office took exactly 45 minutes. I did not turn on the radio. I sat in the absolute, ringing quiet of the vehicle, feeling the heavy, rhythmic thud of my own heart against my ribs. I was hurting. My body was still actively, painfully recovering from the invasive removal of a deeply rooted mass. But as I shifted the car into park and briefly looked at my reflection in the rear-view mirror, I realized my physical posture was completely different. I was sitting straighter, taller, and more solidly than I had in a decade. I stepped out of the vehicle and onto the hot, bright pavement. I walked steadily toward the tinted glass double doors of the corporate accounting firm. I was no longer the desperate, exhausted daughter pleading for a microscopic crumb of familial love. I was the silent architect of their compliance, the keeper of their darkest operational secrets. I pushed the heavy glass door open, stepping into the air-conditioned lobby, walking into that final room not to destroy them, but solely as an unbreakable witness to the truth. The conference room at the independent accounting firm was aggressively sterile, smelling faintly of lemon polish and the sharp metallic tang of nervous sweat. A massive mahogany table dominated the space. My father, Victor, sat at the head of it. To his immediate right was my mother, Diana, looking remarkably pale, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Next to her was Mason, aggressively bouncing his knee under the table. Lining the opposite side of the heavy wood were the people holding the absolute power to dismantle my family's entire empire. There was the lead corporate attorney for Cinderpath, shifting uncomfortably in his tailored suit. Next to him sat the senior commercial insurance broker, a man who looked distinctly unhappy to be spending his Friday afternoon policing a client. Finally, sitting with perfect, terrifying posture, was the regional procurement director for the North Crest Private School District. She held a thick, yellow legal pad and a silver pen. I sat at the very far end of the table, as far away from my family as the room physically allowed. I rested my heavy leather binder directly in front of me. Victor cleared his throat. He smoothed his tie, pasted on his signature, ruggedly charming contractor smile, and addressed the room. He spoke with the deep, reassuring cadence he always used to calm anxious property owners. He smoothly declared that today was simply about clearing up a minor, highly emotional internal miscommunication. He looked down the length of the table directly at me, his eyes wide and heavy with an unspoken, desperate command. He told the room that his daughter, their beloved compliance manager, had simply been overwhelmed with a sudden medical issue, causing a temporary lapse in her administrative duties, but that we were all here as a united family to confirm her continued oversight of the company's operations. He stopped talking and waited. He fully expected the lifelong, conditioned reflex to kick in. He expected me to lower my eyes, nod softly, and protect him. The procurement director for North Crest did not look at Victor. She turned her sharp gaze entirely to me. She asked, in a very clear, completely neutral tone, if I was prepared to formally authenticate the compliance addendum submitted under my name 48 hours ago. I did not hesitate. I unclasped the leather binder. The heavy snap echoed loudly in the quiet room. I looked directly at the procurement director and stated that I was not there to authenticate anything. I was there to formally testify to an ongoing pattern of corporate fraud. Victor's confident smile instantly shattered. He slammed his hand flat onto the mahogany table and shouted my name, a booming, aggressive warning meant to terrify me into silence. I completely ignored him. I reached into my binder and pulled out 5 cleanly organized, heavily stapled packets of documents. I slid them across the polished wood, distributing them to the insurance broker, the opposing attorneys, and the North Crest representative. I did not give one to my family. I kept my voice perfectly level, stripping it of all anger, leaving only cold, undeniable facts. I stated that at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, I had formally, legally resigned from all administrative, financial, and compliance responsibilities regarding Cinderpath property recovery. I directed them to page 1 of the packet, which contained the time-stamped master handover email, explicitly proving that Victor, Diana, and Mason were in full possession of all necessary operational data. I then directed them to page 4. I stated clearly for the record that I absolutely did not sign, authorize, or have any prior knowledge of the compliance appendix submitted to the county procurement office on Thursday. I told them that my electronic signature had been illegally copied from a 3-year-old vendor receipt and applied to a government contract without my consent. Furthermore, I directed them to the final page, showing a drafted commercial loan application that listed my personal Social Security number as a guarantor, proving that the unauthorized use of my identity was an active, ongoing strategy. The silence that fell over the boardroom was deafening. The North Crest director stared at the documents, her face tightening into a mask of pure professional disgust. Mason broke first. The reality of the situation finally pierced his arrogant, insulated bubble. He realized that the massive municipal contract, the only thing that could possibly save the company and pay off his terrifying private debts, was completely dead. He panicked. He shoved his chair back violently, the wooden legs screeching against the floor, and pointed a trembling finger directly at our father. Mason screamed that Victor was an absolute idiot. He yelled that forging a federal document was insane, loudly blaming Victor for destroying their only lifeline. Cornered, humiliated, and facing absolute financial ruin in front of the most important people in his industry, Victor exploded. The mythical, fiercely loyal family front completely disintegrated. Victor roared back at Mason, his face flushed purple. He screamed that he only had to forge the document because his worthless son had secretly drained $60,000 from their operating advances to pay off an illegal loan shark. He shouted that Mason had completely broken the financial structure of the company, and that he was just trying to save them all from bankruptcy. The outsiders in the room sat frozen, watching in absolute horror as the Gonzalez family violently tore itself to shreds. The ugly, rotting truth was finally exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights. The North Crest director calmly placed her silver pen down. She closed her yellow legal pad, gathered the evidence packet I had provided, and stood up. She did not raise her voice. She simply announced that the North Crest Private School District was officially, permanently terminating all negotiations with Cinderpath Property Recovery, effective immediately, pending a full notification to the County Fraud Division. The commercial insurance broker adjusted his tie, looking physically sick. He informed Victor's attorney that their corporate policy would be placed under an immediate, mandatory forensic audit, and that coverage was suspended until further notice. The business was not going to collapse by sunset, but it was effectively paralyzed. They were facing catastrophic restructuring costs, crippling legal fees, and the absolute loss of their professional reputation. Diana had not moved. She sat frozen in her chair, staring at the polished table while her husband and son continued to shout venomous insults at one another. Finally, she looked up at me. Her eyes were completely empty. In the very last moment before the absolute end, she finally spoke the truth. Her voice was barely a whisper, cutting through the shouting men. She said that my surgery should have been placed ahead of Mason from the very beginning. It was the apology I had spent 34 years bleeding to hear. But sitting there, listening to the words finally leave her mouth, I felt absolutely nothing. The words were ashes. They arrived far too late to resurrect a relationship that had already decomposed. I did not yell. I did not smile a triumphant, wicked grin. I did not engage in any petty name-calling. I carefully closed my empty leather binder. I stood up, feeling a brief, sharp pull from my healing incisions, and adjusted my jacket. I looked at the three people who shared my blood, the people who had tried to build a kingdom on top of my breaking back. I told them that allowing other people to finally pay the exact price for the disaster they had purposefully built is not cruel. It is just the bill arriving. I turned around and walked out of the heavy glass doors, leaving them trapped inside the room with the undeniable consequences of their own actions. 2 weeks later, I returned to my desk at the Riverton Document Conservatory. The quiet, temperature-controlled air smelled wonderfully of old paper and binding glue. My body was healing beautifully. The physical weight of the cyst was gone, and my energy was slowly returning to me. But the most profound healing had nothing to do with the scalpel. I sat under the warm glow of my magnifying lamp, meticulously brushing adhesive onto a torn, fragile piece of history. I was putting broken things back together, but this time, it was solely on my own terms. The frantic, suffocating noise of my family had been entirely blocked by a permanent legal wall. They were currently drowning in audits, legal battles, and massive financial restructuring, completely cut off from the free labor they had so casually exploited. I smoothed the edge of the antique paper, feeling a profound, absolute peace settle into the very core of my bones. I had finally learned the coldest, most liberating truth a daughter could ever accept. My family had finally learned the devastating cost of my absence, and I had learned that being desperately needed by someone is not, and never will be, the same thing as being loved. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts on this situation. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support me further by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.